Hi, it's Nikki here from Happy Hormones for Life. Today I am really excited because we're talking about all things, well, lots of things actually. I'm not going to spoil it, but I've got the lovely Emma Simpson with me. Now, Emma, we met last year in a writing group as I was writing my new book, and you were finishing yours, I think, along the way. So I'm really, really excited to talk about the book. But I want you to start by telling us your incredible story. I'm not going to say any more than that. I want it to come from you.
Wow, thanks, Nikki. I'm so pleased to be here. And yeah, I mean, it's kind of like, where do I start? So, in terms of what came before the book, so I spent 2 decades working as an air traffic controller. That was my former life. And then as a senior leader in aviation, and I was involved in everything from commercial space flight to flying taxis and going out to talk to NASA and having this like crazy job, which I absolutely loved. But a couple of events happened in my mid 30s, which kind of really pulled the rug out from under my feet. So I had spent my whole career doing this very technical role, and I was very happy. And then I got pregnant with my first child. And when she was born, everything up to that point had all been just very quite normal and rosy and, quite standard. And I was very healthy. But 4 hours after my daughter was born, she started what I thought was hiccuping, and I thought it looked very cute because she was just making these little body shakes. And it turned out she was having a fit. And she was taken away from me very quickly. And it transpired that she had neonatal meningitis. So she was immediately taken away from me into intensive care. And we then entered a sort of strange world of, will she survive? And then they said she probably will survive, but she is likely to have cerebral palsy. And then they said, actually, we think maybe she won't, but she was probably going to be deaf. And then maybe that won't happen. So there was this whole sort of range of options. And I was kind of, in the whole aftermath of what had been quite a difficult, long, lengthy birth process that ended in an emergency. And then trying to assess all this information and think, oh my God, what's going on? I don't know. How do we manage that? How do we, adjusting your expectations of what it's like to be a parent kind of by the hour, as well as managing all the physicality. And, while we're on the subject of hormones and everything, just trying to go through the kind of body shock, not just the body shock of birth, but then the follow-on shock of having your baby removed from you. So all the things that should happen and that flood of kind of oxytocin and all those things sort of not all being abruptly kind of halted, and then feeding wouldn't work, and you know what I mean, all these kind of things were just conspiring to like, this is not how I thought it would be. And not seeing my baby, I mean, I would go into the intensive care unit and learn to change a nappy with my hands through the holders of that, and take photos of her through the plastic. And then my husband would go home, in the days before smartphones, with the camera, and he'd print them off and I'd stick them on my wall in the hospital so I had a picture of her, because I
Oh my goodness.
couldn't actually see her. The first night we were told to take photos of her in case she didn't survive the night, sort of thing. So all this going on and processing. Anyway, after a couple of weeks, she seemed to recover dramatically, and that is a good story. And she's now 18 and she did survive. And so, that all did come good. But after a couple of weeks, when I came home with her, my little precious bundle, and she was still quite fragile, and we didn't know what the impacts were going to be of what she'd experienced with her brain. Um, and I was just kind of trying to process all of that and be a new mum as well. And it was Christmas,
Hard
and it
enough
was,
just doing that, isn't it? Apart from
yeah,
all the stress that you went through.
yeah, exactly. And I felt like I'd been to the moon and back, but I think a lot of new mums do anyway, mostly. And then it was, her Christmas and her first Christmas, and that was lovely. And then in early January that year, my brother, who was kind of like one of my best friends throughout my whole life, and he lived about 5 doors down from me. We were in our 30s and he was in his 30s as well. And he was a few doors down, and he called me one morning in early January while I was off on maternity leave. And he called me early in the morning because he knew I'd be up with the baby. and sort of said, I'm not feeling too well. I was like, okay, that's fine. I'll come over. And he had Crohn's disease, which is something we know a fair amount about now, but not so much again then, 18 years ago. And he used to get quite a lot of pains in his bowel and stuff, and he'd go into hospital and have it treated and be given morphine and things like that. So it was not unusual for him to have a time where he was having a bit of a flare. So I popped round to his house that morning and made him a cup of tea, and then I just said, look, can I get you anything? And he said, oh yeah, go get me, if you could get me some yogurt, because that's easy to digest. So I remember popping out, waiting for the shops to open at 8 o'clock, popping down to the shops to get him some yogurt. And I had the baby strapped to me and my purse in one hand and yogurts in another hand, and, you know, like an octopus. And I saw him ringing me on my old phone in my bag, but I couldn't answer the phone because I had my hands full. And then I never spoke to him again. So what had happened was his pain had got a bit worse, and he called my mum, and he'd gone into hospital. And while it's a long story and it's in the book, which I'll come on to, but while he was waiting to be treated that night, he ultimately wasn't treated and was left. And he died in the night due to a burst bowel and blood poisoning, and it was quite horrendous. So when I woke up the next morning, not knowing this, and I was at a coffee morning, my dad came and found me and just told me, on top of everything that had happened, you know, your brother died last night. And that's when my whole world kind of fractured, really. So from going from a very kind of, nothing like that had ever happened to me before, you know, these events, and they happen so close together. And I think I didn't really know how to manage and process that. Alongside of that, I was on maternity leave from air traffic control at the time. My job relocated. So the radar centre I'd been working in at Heathrow relocated to a place in Southampton. And so when I had to then move house. So while all this was going on, I then had to move house to a place I didn't know, with people I didn't know, away from my support network, away from my family. And what that meant as well was that my husband, who'd had to move with me, clearly, was having an enormous commute back to work in London. So he was gone far more. And I was on my own, bereaved, new
with
mum.
a new baby.
With a new baby. And God knows what was happening. And again, things like postnatal depression weren't really talked about, and certainly not in the way they are now, you know, and the impact of the hormones, let alone grief, and the impact of having a kind of a circumstance like that. And then I found myself there without a support network. So what I did was go back to work. I clung on to the thing that I knew, and I went back to work, and I worked more, and I got busier, and I kept working. And then I had another child, and then I worked more. And, you know, I went into this cycle, which I can look back and see now was just hanging on to something that I knew.
Yeah.
And ultimately 5 years later, I got very sick. I had a breakdown and got very sick, and then everything started to change. So that's kind of the intro to sort of the life before, and where it was all quite simple, to this kind of confluence of events. And then it didn't all start to go wrong straight away. It's like the body, I don't know, it's like this period where your body just keeps going, and then it's like, enough, Em, you've got to address some of this stuff that's happened now.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. And it's amazing, isn't it? How long you can actually last actually doing that to yourself, and really pushing and pushing to get
Yeah.
that. I guess it's you're keeping yourself super busy with another child and job and more and more stuff to distract you from your feelings.
I think it must be that. And, you know, in the years since, I've become so much more aware of the mind-body connection and how the body keeps the score. I use that phrase a lot, and I know it's the name of a very, you know, well-recognized book, which I think is a great book by Bessel van der Kolk, and about how we hold trauma in the body. And ultimately, you know, my body started to fail, and then I realized that my mind was not in a good place, and I was catastrophizing, and all these things again that I didn't know what they were, and there was no one to help me recognize that at the time. But ultimately I ended up being medically retired from the job that I loved. So suddenly then that one thing that I was holding on to was also gone, you know. So it was this whole like series of things, you know, punctuated obviously with amazing things, because I had two daughters, and my first daughter did recover, and she was relatively healthy. And you know, so there was a lot of joy. Obviously, it's not like it's, you know, it's never just a one-way trajectory, is it? So there was all these incredible things happening, but then having to come to this realization that, right, okay, that was going to be my career for life. And also it was our income because it was a high paying job, and I was the breadwinner in the household. So then you have all these practicalities. So after I was retired, I did then go into some senior leadership role working for the Civil Aviation Authority, which was an amazing role for 5 years. But I kind of fell into those patterns again of overworking, overcommitting, getting promoted. I did a master's. You know, I say it's really easy to look back and see, but it was like, okay, I just, this drive to fill my mind with anything but, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I got ill again. And finally, in 2020, before the pandemic hit, I decided to walk away, and we sold our house because financially we had to make some big decisions. And I decided to walk away from that corporate life and, you know, maybe look at living in a completely different way. And that's where the idea of the book started to come around. And also, during that time where I was processing and managing all these things, I had started open water swimming. It's not something I had done as a child. I wasn't like historically a water baby. I didn't grow up by the sea or anything like that. But after my brother died, I remember feeling this kind of almost inexplicable but really primal pull to the water. And much to the surprise of my family, I'm not a great swimmer, you know, but I was just like, oh, there's something about pushing myself to something that scared me, that was not my normal, and also just a place that gave me such a powerful release. So this started happening. This kind of relationship I started having with the open water alongside all of this. And then I suppose that became my constant, you know, because the work thing then did halt, and it was like this. And then as I started to meet people on the shores of lakes and at the sea, and speak to people, primarily women, I realized what extraordinary stories that we all carry. And, you know, people are fascinating. And I just loved hearing their stories. And that's how the idea of the book really began to evolve.
And what was your first experience of open water? How did you even think of it as a something new to do? What was that process?
So I remember it clearly, and I do write about this because it was when we were on a family holiday in Swanage in Dorset, and my daughters were probably about 4 and 2 years old at the time, so I was still quite busy. I was down there with the family, and it was August, so they have like this festival in Swanage every August, and there's all sorts of events on, and Punch and Judy and sandcastle competitions. So the kids were all involved in that. And I remember walking along the pier, and there was a sea swim, and it had this thing, and it was like a 500 meter or a 1 kilometer sea swim. And I just said to my husband, oh, I'm going to do that. And he was like, really? Okay. And I was like, yeah, no, I just feel the need, you know, I'm going to do it. And I just thought, I can do that 500 meters, you know, and I knew I wasn't a great swimmer, but I can swim, you know, I can breaststroke. I was like, that's fine. I wasn't going to do the kilometer, but I thought, right, I'm going to give this a go. So, you know, he took the kids, and I signed up, and then I turned up. And I was literally there in my like Marks and Spencer's body control post baby swimsuit and flip flops. And there were all these people in wetsuits and hats and boots. And I was like, I didn't even have a swim hat. I mean, I haven't worn a swim hat since I was 12. So I was just like, oh my God, what was I thinking? I mean, really, what was I thinking? What, you know? And anyway, my husband was looking after the kids. And my sister came up with me, and she was so lovely. And she was like, right, Em, go on. I mean, she doesn't swim, but she was like, you can do this, you got this, kind of thing. And I got in, and I don't know, something really kind of quite fundamental, I think, started to shift in me. And I got in the water, and it was cold, and I was scared, and, you know, all those things. But I did it, and I did it in my Marks and Spencer swimsuit without a swim hat and with nothing on my feet. And when I got out, I was kind of shaky because I was adrenaline and, you know, and all this. And I don't know, I've got a picture of the smile on my face when I got out. And it was just like, I felt like, oh, you know, I felt like I'd been existing in a sort of fog for such a long time. And then I just felt this real kind of joy. And it's like, right, there's something in this. There's something in
Oh, that's
this.
amazing.
Mm.
And I so hear you, because I get the same feeling when I obviously haven't been through the things you've been through, but the same kind of sense of well-being, sense of like, I don't know, your skin tingles, you feel alive, I think, is one of the things I feel like when I'm in the sea. I don't get to do it very often, but tell me a little bit more about what you've since found out about swimming and cold water that helps us, particularly emotionally.
Yeah. So, I mean, after that, I think it was probably a year before I did anything again, because again, it was life and I had young kids. So it wasn't like I could suddenly just, this is my new hobby. And then I did something in Loch Lomond in Scotland.
And that
And I
would have
did,
been cold.
well, it was cold and it was scary, right? Because it's so deep. I mean, the
And
sea
there's
is scary.
monsters in those locks.
Well, there's monsters. This is it. There's beasties. And, I mean, I'm scared of the sea. I was scared of the loch, was terrified. The surrounding is so beautiful, but the water is really, really dark.
And they're very deep, aren't they, those
They're
locks?
so deep. And I put my face down, I
Yeah.
shut my eyes. I'd learned to front crawl by then. I did do some sort of swim lessons and I learned to front crawl by then. I think I did about 2 kilometers in the water. But yeah, I did definitely shut my eyes and I'd sort of put my head up and be like, okay, I'm still here. So I think initially it's a real overcoming of fear. And I think there's just this, a lot of people say to me, oh, I'm really scared of the water and I don't swim. I'm like, that's okay. You don't have to be a swimmer. You don't have to have, be training to swim the channel or doing this. I didn't do any of that, not at first anyway. And you feel so proud of yourself. And I think it's also something that's just for you in that moment. And when you have a busy life, and whether you have children or not, you will have dependencies on you, whether it's work or elderly parents or friends or whatever it is. We all have a lot of dependencies that we carry. So something about being in the water is just for you. And I think that's what makes it quite special. And then as I started to do it more and more and more, and particularly from 2020, it got quite interesting because I think up until that point, I hadn't swum through a winter, certainly not without a wetsuit. But as we went into the pandemic and everything got very complicated and we weren't allowed to swim at the places I would normally swim at, we were dipping in rivers and stuff like that. So I'd find myself going to a river in December and January and trying to put a wetsuit on and off on the riverbanks. And I just thought, sod that. And I just started going in my bikini. So that happened kind of because of lockdown. So I was in January 2021 then dipping in rivers in the snow in a bikini with the one friend you were allowed to meet, keep, always making sure that there was somebody there for safety and all that kind of stuff. My air traffic controller safety ethos always kind of stayed. But then in terms of what we experience, I think in the cold water in particular, it's something quite extraordinary because for those of us who have very busy brains and may struggle to switch that off, the cold water does that for me. And I know anecdotally for so many women, so many people talk about it as like their reset button, because when you get in, it's kind of extraordinary that you're right in the body because it's quite painful depending how cold it is. And you're like, okay. And so you've got to breathe and you've got to really center yourself and breathe into it. And then you just kind of are very much in the physiology of what's happening in your body. It's these sort of, I call them like crackles. It's almost like electricity, because every sensor in your body becomes alive with this feeling in that sort of minute or two before you adjust. And then it starts to feel quite silky, so you have this thing. And I think by almost freezing your body into the moment, you bring your brain into the moment. And for me, that is extraordinarily powerful, quite meditative, really.
Yeah. Very mindful, isn't it? You're so focused on what's going on in the body that
Yeah.
the mind kind of just shuts down for a bit.
Yeah. And that's, I don't find a lot of things that enable me to do that. Like I would love to be able to meditate, and maybe one day I will. And it's different things for everybody, obviously. But like I find yoga quite good for it because again, I'm focusing on my bodily position in that moment and trying to hold a position, but I'm not very good at sort of seated mindfulness. So it's really powerful for that. And then I think when it's warm, it's when the water's warmer, it's a very different experience. It's just, there's also like a real playfulness about it, and there's fun, and it opens up this childlike quality that we suppress by being adults. And there's just a lot of fun and community and connection and laughing. And then you're in nature. You know, I don't swim in swimming pools. I've only done that to have a few lessons. I have no interest in swimming in a swimming pool at all. I just want to be outside and look at the trees and the birds and ignore what's in the water underneath me
Yeah.
and just pretend there's nothing else in there except me, you know. And but it's, yeah, it's back to those fundamental things.
You can't help but connect with nature at that point, can you? So
Yeah,
you're connecting with yourself, but you're also connecting with nature. And if you're, like you've got your feet on the ground to get in, you're already connecting through the earth. You're doing earthing already, aren't you? And then in the
100%.
water, you've got that, I don't know, whatever the quality of water, you've got water on your skin. And they've done so many scientific studies now that show the impact any kind of body of water has on our health, mentally and physically.
Yeah, and I love what you say about earthing. I think that's so true, because whether it's rocks or whether it's sand,
Mm.
and the benefits of being barefoot in those situations is you really do experience that, you know, and that's where it starts. And it starts before you get in, and it starts with breathing and anticipating getting in and taking in what's around you. And, you know, I write about this as well. It's about the sort of the ability to notice and notice things. Whereas in my former life, even before all the like difficult stuff happened, I was very busy. I mean, still busy, but you know, I would like rush around and not notice anything. And, you know, I'd walk past a shop and I wouldn't know if it was open or shut, or walk past someone and I wouldn't see them. But, you know, I get into this place where I'm in the water, and I wrote about this in the first chapter, where I noticed a bee that was struggling on the surface of the water as I was swimming, you know, something the size of a 5p. And suddenly I become so aware of it because I'm really, really present and I'm
Mm.
really there. And so I rescued this bee. So, you know, and I came out and I was like, wow, how many bees have I walked past in the past however many years that, you know, I wouldn't have seen. And now it's brought me to that level of noticing, which is really special.
Really, really special and very, very rare in our crazy whirlwind lives.
It's
We never stop to
exactly.
notice the tiniest thing, do we? So
No.
I love that. Any other benefits while we're on this? Because I want to move on a little bit to something else that you talk about in the book.
Um, well, yeah, I mean, there's the physiological, there's the mental,
Mm.
and then there is the community and the connection. So I think that's really important as
Another
well.
big thing, isn't it?
Massive, yeah. I mean, I can go to the lake that I swim at regularly, and I can go and just be on my own and be tearful, and that does happen quite a lot, and just be like, needs to be held by the water. But I can go and I can speak to people, and they might be people I know or people I don't know, but there is a kinship, and there is a feeling. It's such a strong feeling of community.
And how has all of that helped with you process those feelings from your brother's death and the grief from all that period of time, do you think?
I think a large part of it, and this is one of the drivers as to why I write, is that you know you're not alone, because grief is a very lonely path. And it's one of the only inevitable paths, because it's one of the things that we will all experience. We may not all have children. We may not all have had a parent. We may not all have a sibling. You know, we may not all have certain relationships, but we will all experience loss in whatever form it is. And so it's ironic that it is such a lonely path, but it's because everyone's path is so individual and you have to work that out for yourself. But also, I think the experiences I've had around the water have really just made me know that we're not alone. We are not alone in this, and you feel connected. Whether it's connected, you know, there are also, it can feel quite spiritual. You know, I feel connected to those that I have lost, my brother and subsequently my dad, neither of who ever really swum. But, you know, I can float on the water on a spring afternoon and look at the clouds and feel like I'm part of something and that I'm connected to them, you know? So there's so many reasons behind it.
Yeah, it makes sense when you describe it like that. In your book, you also talk a bit about, well, quite a lot about depression, and you mention it in terms of an elephant on your chest. Can you just tell us a little bit about that? Because it might be sound a little bit new to some people.
Yeah, of course. So we've always had this, you know, this metaphor of the black dog in depression that
Mm.
people talk about. And it never really felt like a black dog for me. And the reason I think of it like an elephant is there's a couple of things. So elephants are my favorite animal. I've always loved elephants. And I think they've got some very special qualities. Their matriarchal nature and their memories and their emotions, and they experience grief. And so I've always found elephants very special in concept, not that I spent a whole lot of time with them. But I think for me, when the depression strikes, it's like such a heavy weight here. Like I almost can't get up, like I can't get out of bed, and it's like I can't move. And so it started to feel for me, rather than a black dog snarling at me from the corner of the room, like there was an elephant sat on my chest. And I think the power of it being an elephant for me as well is that it's not necessarily it's not a wholly negative image at all. Mm-hmm. So also, I think it's a kind of, right, something's going on here. You need to take care of yourself. It's like, don't ignore me. Don't just, don't just go through this. And I talk about in the book about going to the lake when I feel that, and I can't carry the weight of the elephant, but when I get in the water, the elephant becomes a bit lighter. And so I have this whole sort of thing around it, and that is how I experience it. Sometimes it gets a bit lighter. Sometimes I get in the lake and I feel like the elephant playfully swims away, waves at me, spouts her trunk and goes off. Sometimes she stays with me, and sometimes it's still there, but it's just a bit less heavy than it was when I went in. So that's how I feel it.
So that's your way of kind of measuring the effects of what you're doing, in a way, if you look at it that way.
Yeah.
How heavy does the elephant feel?
Yeah, and it's that, when I get in the water, there is a physical lightening, but I do also feel a mental load lightening. I do. It, for whatever reason it is, or whatever time of year, whether it is because I've come into that moment, or I've just needed to cry in a way that I didn't want to cry out of the water. It's strange. Sometimes I feel like a real release, and I can scream under the water and no one can hear me. Mm-hmm. Or I can cry into it, or I can just go and connect with someone that was just the right thing to happen at that moment, and look around and feel part of something bigger. And just, there's so much evidence around the benefits of being outdoors if we suffer from depression, even just going out for a walk, getting in the sunshine. And so having that goal of going for a swim, even if I don't feel able to swim, I can just go and wade into the water and sit down or something. You know what I mean? I can just be there. If I sat in bed and thought, oh, I know I should go for a walk, I quite possibly wouldn't go for a walk. I'd just be like, I can't. But I'll book a swim, and even if I need someone to drive me there, I will go, and it will help. It will help.
I think there's that whole don't want to let someone down thing. So if you actually book something in and you're going with someone else, or something where you have to you feel bad if you don't go. If you're just relying on yourself, it's very easy not to do it.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. And that, even booking it, even if I book and pay for it, it's not about the money, but it's like, I've made a commitment to do this thing. So now I'm going to do it. And I think that's really powerful. And having that goal, it's like, okay, that's a thing I'm doing. It's a actual tangible arrangement.
In the diary,
it's an arrangement.
Yeah. It's not something that you just off the cuff. So what else has helped you with your mental health in this area? I know swimming is the main thing for you, but is there anything else that you've tried and felt that's really helped you?
Well, yeah, I mean, lots of things, and it's ever evolving. So for a period, I did quite a lot of running, and I loved that, and I think that was tremendously helpful. And then I got injured, so my running kind of went very much downhill. I'm trying to get back into it now, but with some kindness to myself, that I don't have the running fitness that I used to have. And it's so different for everybody. And this is the thing, even though the book is about the water in a way, it isn't. It's about how we weather the ebb and flow of life, and how we manage those things. And that vehicle for some people might be music, it might be singing, it might be dancing, it might be golf, it might be anything. I mean, recently, and I wrote a piece about this on my Substack, because I write on Substack most weeks. I joined a crochet group, and now I've never done anything craft-like in my life. It's not really something that I feel I have a natural tendency towards in my skill sets. But yeah, I started crocheting and oh my God, I love it. I love it. And I love it partly because again, it's quite mindful
Mm.
and I have to concentrate enough on it that it keeps me in the moment. It's quite mathematical, so it suits my mind. Um, and also I go to a group on a Monday and they are just really, really lovely, kind people. And it makes me feel good in the world, you know? So I think there are so many things. Those are some of the things I've experienced.
Finding connection is one of the most important things, isn't it? Like
Yeah.
really finding and new connections obviously really help, and finding something that you're all kind of working towards, like crochet, you're making something, or
Yeah.
book club, or a new sport, or a new thing that you're learning together.
Yeah. I mean, sorry, just the one thing I must mention as well is that like writing. So writing has been hugely helpful, hugely cathartic. And um, writing the book has been unexpected because I didn't expect to write about Brian, my brother, in the book. That only came about after I got signed by the agent. So initially it was very much a collection of stories of women and our experiences. And because of the lockdown, I ended up speaking to people all over the world. So that was really beautiful. So I did have a collection of people with all sorts of experiences and backgrounds and different cultures, which was amazing. But at that point, Brian wasn't really in the book. There was a bit about him in my intro. But after the meeting with the agent, that became very much front and center because they really kind of tested me on what was the narrative arc of the book, like what was the hook, what was the story, and started asking me a lot more about my life, which I hadn't really expected to do. And they were like, no, that's it. That's the story. It's about what's happened to you and how you survived it and how the water played a part in that. So we want you to tell your story. So now that kind of threads its way throughout. So writing has been an enormous part of my own mental health support, I guess, but with the caveat that it can be quite lonely because I sit in my lovely little cabin in the back of the garden, but on my own, you know. So that's why all these other things I've talked about are so important alongside, because it's back to the connection.
You have to do lots of different things, don't you? It's not
Yeah.
just one thing ever.
No.
They fit into this jigsaw puzzle, as I talk about in my book, of your toolkit of, you know, right, okay, so I love the writing because it does this, but I need to connect, so I need to do this piece, and it all fits together.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Because things come and go. You're like, I love
yeah,
running. Oh, I'm injured. I can't run.
yeah.
Okay. There's
Now you've got to
nothing you can,
adapt.
exactly. There's nothing you can do about that. There's no point crying about the fact that you can't run. Well, you can for a little bit, but you know, but then find something else. There is always something else. I joined rock choir for a while and then I was up singing at the Edinburgh Festival and that was great. But then I couldn't go anymore because my daughter needs a lift somewhere on the same night. So every week. So, you know, it's like, okay, I can't do that anymore. Fine. I now do crochet. You know, yeah, there's something
Yeah.
else.
I love that we have actually got a lot of resources available to us.
Yeah.
It's not, doesn't all cost money either. I mean, going out for a walk and or joining a local rambling club or whatever it is that you love to do, focus on
Yeah.
that first, I think is probably the key. Emma, it's been lovely to chat with you. I love how you've put all these things, and you know, I love how you talk. First of all, I love how you write. Your writing is sublime. It is unbelievable. I mean, go and check out Emma on Substack. She posts some
Yeah.
excerpts in there of her writing, and you'll see what I mean when you start to read it. It's beautiful.
Thanks, Nikki.
Um, and when is your book out for a start?
So it's out on the 27th of March, is publication date. It's available now for pre-order on Amazon, Waterstones, Foils, Blackwells, all the usual sites.
Amazing.
Yeah, so it's available, and then the actual book will be out end of March, and the audio will be out shortly after that.
Now, if you're listening to this and it's not March yet, 2025, go and join Emma's Substack. What's the Substack called, Emma?
So it's called Lemon Soul, spelled Soul. But you can find me there as well under Emma Simpson Author, and Instagram the same, Emma Simpson Author. That's where I am everywhere. So yeah, my Substack's Lemon Soul, slices of life, refreshing perspectives.
Well, from what I've read so far, I cannot wait to get my hands on the actual copy. So
Great
I'm
stuff.
very excited. Thank you so much for joining me. It's been absolutely amazing to hear your story, and
Thank
you
you.
will be and have done inspired many women to go and find something new to focus on. And
Thanks so much, Nina.
all right, take
Thank
care.
you.
Take care.